In this video, we're talking about the Sony ZV-E1. It's a new camera from Sony that is kind of like an A7S III or an FX3, but in a new body style with some different automation features. Right now, I'm using what's called an auto framing mode, which it's tracking me and reframing me even though the camera's standing over there on a tripod. So in this video, I'm gonna go through all of these features that make this camera unique and whether I think this is a good camera for content creators or not. All right, let's get into it. So first, let's just go over the specs of this camera and what you're getting. So it's basically a rehoused A7S III or FX3. It's the same sensor. So you get 4K, 24, 30, 60, all the way up to 120 frames per second, which isn't available yet, but Sony's telling me that it's going to be coming in an update. It's the same sensor, so it goes all the way up to 4K, 120 frames per second if you want that super buttery slow-mo. Now also with this sensor, it's the 12 megapixel dual native ISO sensor. So that means you could shoot in super low light situations and have a super clean image. I was testing here and you could see that as soon as you bump from 10,000 ISO to 12,800 ISO, the image cleans up. So when you're in brighter situations like out here on the beach, you shoot in the lower ISOs, but if you're at night, you shoot in the higher ISOs and you're still gonna get a clean looking image. And one of the big things about this camera and what makes it so interesting for content creators is that it's a full frame camera packed into this tiny body. And this camera is geared towards video creators. So all the buttons and how it's laid out is geared towards shooting video versus photos. Now on top of that, Sony's included some new AI and automation features into this camera that make the content creation process much easier. So you don't have to do a lot of these things in editing software, but you could just do things like reframing right inside the camera. So let's talk about the overview of how this camera is laid out. On the top, you have your photo, video, and S and Q button that you could switch between easily. S and Q is slow and quick for slow motion, or if you want to do quick motion like time lapses. You have a big record button, and then on the shutter button, you have your on-off switch, and you have a lever to be able to zoom in and out. So if you're using one of Sony's power zoom lenses, you could control it right here on the camera body. But if you're using a lens like the one I currently have, which is the Sony 20-70 f4, you could use this to activate clear image zoom, and you could zoom in on your 4K image 1.5 times. So that means right now on this lens, I could trigger it and zoom in on my face if I really wanted to. I don't want to shoot this close, but you have the capability to do power zoom moves, but with a fixed focal length. So it opens up the world of possibilities to be able to zoom within your footage, but also this clear image zoom that Sony has on this camera and all the other cameras like the A7S III and FX3 is what they use for these automation features to be able to punch in and reframe. Now the screen is a flip screen, so you could easily see yourself if you're in front or behind camera. The ports that you have access to is a microphone in, you have a USB-C, you have one card slot, you have a micro HDMI, and you have a headphone out. So it has all the ports that you would expect on a camera to be able to use it in a variety of ways. However, the HDMI is small, so if you're connecting an external monitor, you do have to use that really small HDMI port. But personally, when I'm operating with this camera, this is a vlog style camera. This is something that I want to be able to pick up, walk around with me, attach maybe a microphone, but that's it. It's very much geared towards content creators who want to be able to make content easy and not be attaching a bunch of extra things to it. So right now I'm using my DJI mic for the audio, but if you look on top of this camera, they've put in a stereo microphone with the intent to just use the camera without any external audio. And then on the back of the camera, you have a lot of the features that you find on other Sony cameras. You have your menu, you have your function button, and then the screen itself is a touch screen. And you could do some different motions on the screen like swiping to bring your menus in and out. So you'll notice that on either side, you have this new menu that's popped up that has a ton of different features on it. And if you swipe left, it removes this menu. Now, if you swipe up, this is also gonna bring up your function menu. So with this camera, Sony has added a lot of accessibility to be able to turn on and off different features. So let's talk about the stabilization that's in this camera. So you have no stabilization. That's what I have it on right now. And you can see that it's wobbly as I walk around. Now, with no stabilization, there's no crop whatsoever. Now, this is standard stabilization, so you're getting some level of stabilization and there's no crop. Now, I'm gonna turn on my active stabilization and you can see that the image is now cropped in, but it is a much more stable shot than when I'm using just the standard stabilization. So this is great for this kind of content when I'm walking around talking to my camera and vlogging. And I'm shooting on a 20mm, so it crops in a little bit, but with that 20mm, you can get a better vlog style shot when you're out filming, and even if it's cropping in to stabilize, it's still gonna look good. And then there's this extra layer of stabilization that's even more punched in. This is called dynamic active stabilization. And this is even more cropped. You can see how much closer I am holding the camera the same distance, but you get a much better level of stabilization. And yeah, this might not be super useful for vlogging because it's so punched in, but when you're behind camera and you're filming subjects or you're filming locations, you can get these tripod level shots by just hand holding the camera. And so it's gonna make such a difference when you just need that stabilization and you don't wanna have to pull out a gimbal or pull out a tripod. Next, we need to talk about the auto framing feature. I have it turned on right now. So my camera's just sitting over there on a tripod, but it's gonna zoom in and find me in the frame and then track me. So if I move this way, the frame's gonna follow me. And if I move over here, it's gonna follow me back over here. In the menu settings, you can see that there's some different options that allow you to change how much you want to frame and how fast you want the camera to zoom in and move around. And so the purpose of this feature is so that you could always have a close-up shot, medium shot, or a wide shot of yourself when you're filming, and you can have the camera move around, and it's all done automatically. It's basically using the clear image zoom and pairing that with some AI technology so that it follows your subject or you whenever you're walking around in your frame. It makes it feel like there's a second person operating the camera, but you're just out by yourself and the camera's doing everything for you. Now, I know there's some of you out there that will say, well, can't you do all this in your editing software? And yes, you can. However, this just simplifies the process and just makes everything much easier when you're out filming so that you can have a faster workflow. You might not want to have to go in and keyframe and follow you around if you want this close-up shot of yourself walking around the frame. And it's also easier for creators who are just getting started, who don't necessarily want to learn how to keyframe and follow everything in an editing software and just want to make content quick and get it up, posted on social media. The next thing we need to talk about is audio. So I've switched from my wireless mic that I've been using for this whole video, and I've now switched into the audio that's in the Sony ZV-E1. Now, this microphone on top of the camera is unique because it allows you to change the polar direction of how it's picking up your vocals. Right now, I have it set to just in front of the camera. So wherever I'm at in front of the camera, you're gonna get cleaner audio, but anything that's going on behind the camera, you're not gonna hear it. It's picking up the audio for me in front of the camera. So this is great for like a vlog-like setting. So now I've switched the audio to the back of the camera. So I'm gonna move over here to the back and it's gonna sound better. So if you're filming something out front of your camera, but you still wanna talk to the camera, well, you'd set it to this back setting, and then whatever's here in the front is your visual, and then you could be talking from behind camera. So if you're asking questions or if you're narrating what's going on, then you do it from behind camera, and whatever's in front of camera, you're not gonna hear the audio as well out there. Now there's one more setting that I just flipped to, which is auto. So it's gonna detect the audio that's going on in the 360, and it's gonna best use these microphones to capture that audio. So if you're talking in front of camera, it's gonna focus on your vocals in front of camera. But if you move somewhere else, well, it's gonna start changing the polar pattern so that if you go behind camera, it's gonna change the audio so you can hear it better. But if you move back to in front of camera, then the audio is gonna shift then back to you in front of camera. Now with the autofocus in this camera, you have a lot of different options. You could go from a human to animal and birds. You could have just an animal, just a bird. You could have insects, car and train, or even airplane. So you pick the type of subject that you're trying to film, and it's gonna auto recognize that style of person, creature, or object, and it's going to use that to lock on the autofocus. Now, one cool thing that they've included in this camera for focus is the product showcase. And so this feature allows you to put anything in front of camera and the focus is automatically going to jump to it. Even if you see my face back here, it's not going to jump to me, and it's set to human recognition. So it's going to find my face, focus on me, but if I put something between me and the camera, well, it's going to focus on that. So you could use this in a variety of ways when you want to be able to shift that focus to things that you're holding up in front of camera right there and not always be locked on to you or whoever your subject is. Now, there's a lot of features in this camera that aren't necessarily going to appeal to someone who's been working on more professional level cameras, but if this is your introduction into full frame cameras, then this camera has a lot of automation. So for one thing, I'm just in auto at the moment, but I could click a button right here on top and it goes to the defocusing mode. And so now it's gonna auto adjust the settings and the background's gonna go blurry. You click it again and it goes to clear, and now the background is gonna be not so blurry. And these kind of features are really catered to creators who are just getting started on this style of camera, and not so much for someone who understands how every button and every feature works when they're working with a full frame camera. So this camera is made to be accessible to all levels of creators. And if you are someone who knows what you're doing with your camera, knows how to adjust all the settings to get the looks that you want, well then using a setting like defocus doesn't really make sense. However, if you are someone who doesn't understand how to get the blurry background, you just click one button when you're in auto and you get a blurry background. Now, in terms of color on this camera, you have a bunch of creative looks that can be applied to your footage in like the standard setting. But if you're someone who uses like S-Log, well, there are a couple things missing. So when you go into the menu, you'll see that it goes PP1 through 6, but then 7, 8, 9 are missing. And then 10 and 11 are actually in the camera as well. And so you don't have access to S-Log 2 in this camera, you only have S-Log 3. But you also have S-Cinetone, so if you do want to shoot in Cinetone, you have it available. And if you want to shoot in log, well, you have S-Log 3 in this camera. And something that's interesting with the log shooting on this camera is that you don't have to go and set it in a picture profile. They actually have a button that just says log shooting, and it turns on everything that you need to start shooting in log. Now, one other cool feature with this camera, you could easily flip to S&Q mode. So if you want to do internal slow motion easily, you could do that. But if you also want to do time lapse, there's a time lapse feature built into this camera. So you could do time lapses without having to just set the camera down and let it record for long periods of time and then speed it up later. The whole thing with this camera is doing everything internal so that you don't have to go through and do some additional editing later. They're trying to make everything super easy for content creators. So you can pull the footage right from the camera and do a quick edit and be able to post it and move on to the next video. So who is this camera for, and is this a camera that you should get? Well, it's pretty clear. This is for content creators. This is for those of you who are out there filming by yourself and you want some of these automation features that just makes the process a little bit easier and a little bit faster. It's an awesome sensor. I've been using the A7S III for all of my videos. And so if you want to see samples of what the footage could look like, well, look at footage from an A7S III or an FX3. It's all the same because it's all using the same sensor. So there's no loss in image quality, there's no loss in photo quality. It's all about the features and how the camera is set up. The body style, I think, is great. Super tiny, super compact, but you still get all of these features built into it. Now, there are some downsides to this camera. One is that it overheats when you shoot in 4K 60, around 30 minutes with my testing. But if you're shooting in 4K 24 or 30, haven't really seen any overheating issues. I know that's something that some people will complain about, but I don't personally do long takes of 4K 60, so not an issue. And you know, we'll see with firmware updates if that gets fixed. Now, another downside is no full-size HDMI. However, the way that I would operate this camera is like this: vlogging, YouTube content, like just quick content where I don't need an external monitor. So to me, that little micro HDMI is not that big of a deal. And then one big downside is the lack of the EVF. For some of you, that's not a big deal. For me, when I'm outdoor shooting, it's hard to see the screen sometimes, to see your exposure and make sure that everything is getting captured properly. So that is one downside working with this camera, but it's definitely a trade-off because a lot of the features that are in this camera, you're not gonna find in the A7S III. You don't have all these automation features that make it easy, and you don't have the extra stability. And also with the A7S III, you don't have the body design that's catered towards video creators. I do like this camera, and I'm actually gonna pick one of these cameras up whenever they're available, and I could use this in professional settings, but as just like a quick run and gun style camera. This camera paired with the 20-70 is gonna be my go-to for YouTube style content. And this is also gonna be a great backup camera. So if I am shooting on an FX3, FX6, A7S III, well, having one of these along just gives me another camera that gives me a great look, has some different features than those cameras, but it's super easy to use and just pick up and grab some quick shots. And if you want to see the kind of footage that you can capture with this camera, well, make sure you check out this video right here. It's a documentary I did when I went out to India, and I shot it all on the A7S III and the FX3 with my buddy Jake, which is the same sensor that's in this camera. So I'll see you over there.